The NBA regular season is finally over, and the Philadelphia 76ers can shift their attention to building out the roster for next year and putting this downright dreadful season behind them. There are some significant decisions that need to be made around several members of this Sixers team as the organization begins to sort through who should be back and who is it time to move on from at this current point. Well, the players took to the podium themselves to give a little bit of their mindset on what their outlook is heading into this offseason, and we got some interesting quotes from a couple guys. Some firm commitments for players that are expected to return on the Sixers team and some guys that control their own destiny. So I'm going to dive into each of that in this video here. As I mentioned before, I will be going through an almost a player-by-player basis, going through talking about the contract implications, the actual on-court play, what their role will be like. May hold off on some of that until after the May 12th NBA draft lottery day. That is going to be an incredibly fateful day for the Sixers franchise, and it does impact the salary cap implications beyond just what their draft pick is. Certainly from a player or personnel perspective, things change based on where that draft slot does fall, or if it does fall. For example, if they have Cooper Flag, all of a sudden maybe it isn't as pressing of a need to bring back a guy like Gershon Yabusele, and there are obviously the monetary implications as well based on what the value that it would be assigned to a 1 pick versus 6 pick versus not getting that draft pick at all. So the point being here, there are some moving parts that we are going to get into and kind of holding off on some of those specifics, but do want to talk about what we know at this current point. And I'm going to start with what was the biggest surprise to me of all of these players when speaking, and that is with Kyle Lowry himself. Now, we know that Kyle Lowry has had an interesting season, but it will not be his last one. As Kyle Lowry says, he wants to play one more year, and he hopes it's in Philly. He said it was sad coming to the Wells Fargo Center today with no playoffs. Now, my gut feeling and reaction for how this went down here, I'm pretty confident that Kyle Lowry signed that contract last offseason with the intention of this essentially being his victory tour, his ride off into the sunset, his last season, get one more playoff run, and be a sort of part of a contending team. And obviously, none of that came together. That this season went off the rails for a variety of reasons, and I think he doesn't feel great about it ending on those terms there. So I think that's probably where this comes from. I'm not going to go too far into this because I think there's a real chance where Kyle, takes some time away, is able to reflect, and maybe has a different tune on this. But if he wants to play again, you obviously can't stop the guy. Now, does that mean that the Sixers have to bring him back? Absolutely not there. I like Kyle. I would feel really bad about this being the way things end. But to me, I thought the clean fix, or what I expected to happen from here, is he was just going to hop on the other side of that line and be an assistant coach next year. That offer remains on the table in my mind. Would have no issue if that is the case there. And I do think there is some value with Lowry still being around. Something that really stood out to me this year, some constant praise from Jared McCain. And for example, Clutch Point Sam DiGiovanni tweets out, Jared McCain said talking with Tyrese Maxey and Kyle Lowry on the bench and watching Jared Butler in pick and rolls has helped him learn as he's watched games from the sideline. I do think Lowry is the type of veteran, the type of player that was a really positive influence to have on a guy like Jared McCain, which is really important for a guy who is a high pedigree rookie who we have really high hopes for moving forward. Now, with that being said, the clear message that I want the Sixers to take in is every single roster spot next year needs to be built and predicated around actually helping this team win. I understand there is value in veteran leadership, and there is, the veterans that you need come playoff time, but you got to survive an entire season, and I think too many of these roster spots this year were taken for granted there. Morey himself said that and took that on the chin when he spoke to the media, so I think that is encouraging, but we will see how this play out. Now, to give a little bit more credit to Lowry, he did have what I think was probably the quote of the day when he was asked, how will you remember this season? And he said, I'll try not to. And boy, won't we all, Kyle. Now, to keep it rolling here, another player that did talk a little bit about his future is Kelly Oubre. And Oubre was asked about it. There's two quotes that I did want to pull off here from PHLY Sixers. Kelly Oubre said, quote, I'm getting back to myself, and I'm bringing my swag back. All I know is that I'll come back better than I was this year. I'm not satisfied with the way I'm perceived by you guys, by the fans, for what I do bring to the NBA. So Tsunami's back. And then per Adam Aronson of Philly Voice here, Kelly Oubre Jr. said, quote, I like to finish what I started, and I don't feel complete. So Godspeed, when asked about his upcoming player option. I will say I did watch the actual interview myself. The question was asked by Philly Sports Network Zach Chavalella. Shout out to Zach, awesome dude, former coworker of mine, who asked about Kelly. And Kelly starts off his answer. He said, I'm a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. I feel like I haven't finished what I started, and I do plan on being back. And he does have a player option next year. We'll talk on the specifics of that in a second. But Kelly is more than welcome back in my mind. I understand he's a controversial figure, but I do think Oubre is a guy who could fall into the category of right player, wrong role on this Sixers team. I think he deserves credit for carrying himself with a necessary professionalism all season. And to give you the numbers for what this guy produced, we're not hanging the hat. Nobody can on this season overall, but 15.1 points per game, 6.1 rebounds, 1.8 assists. The 29.3% three-point percentage is really the biggest concern there, and that's kind of the what really puts the ceiling or keeps it low on Kelly as a basketball player. I wish he was a better shooter, and the entire outlook and value of him as a player would be significantly different if he was just a league average three-point shooter. If he could shoot like 34, 35% from three, we're really talking about this guy as like a potential $15 million, $20 million guy, but he's not that, unfortunately. Now, with that being said, I still think there was a lot of good ways that Kelly was used. Really effective in the dunker spot, a guy who's an actual threat to dunk it in the dunker spot, which hasn't really been the case with a lot of Sixers when we think about the PJ Tucker era, Ben Simmons even in that role, who he kind of, turned away from that by the end of his career. Oubre is a guy that does want to get putbacks, does want to create, and defensively, I thought he took another leap this year. During those brief stretches where this team was still trying to win here, we're seeing Oubre sort of set the tone. And by the way, led the team in minutes this year. As I mentioned, a professionalism that he carried himself with that I really appreciated. So Kelly cannot probably be penciling it as a starting caliber player on this team. He should not be for next year. But having him as a part of this organization, I have no part of. And I like that he seems to really like Philly and is embracing it as a home in a way that has not been the case for the rest of his career here. Now, the last guy that did speak and clearly indicate his intentions for returning to the Philadelphia 76ers, it was Andre Drummond. And per Philly Sixers Galaxy here, they tweet out breaking: Andre Drummond, who has a $5 million player option for next season, plans to return to the Sixers, he told reporters. Now, to take a look at the salary cap implications here, this is the multi-year breakdown, and this is the problem with giving out player options in the way that Daryl Morey did this last offseason, is you don't have full control here. That Kelly Oubre, Andre Drummond, and Eric Gordon, who we have not even brought up yet, it is fully up to them whether or not they want to be back. Now, as far as the Eric Gordon conversation, I don't think Eric Gordon will be back under just about any circumstance. I think he hated it in Philadelphia. I think he hates Joel Embiid from everything that I've heard directly about all this stuff here. And I do think that the surgery he had probably could have played through for quite a bit of time if he had any interest in continuing to do that. So for Gordon, it just didn't work. It is what it is. I don't think we have to worry about him opting into that player option unless it does involve getting him on a team that he desires. I do think there's a world, and the Sixers should certainly walk down this path if that is on the table, where you can get something back by just sending Gordon to a team. Like maybe there is a salary cap strong team that can't sign a free agent like Eric Gordon. I don't think this would necessarily work. I believe technically his contract is slightly above a veteran's minimum. So if there is kind of a stipulation that he wants to keep that dollar amount here, the bottom line is I don't think there is a world where Eric Gordon is in a Sixers uniform next year, and I have no problem with that being the case. But that is one of the problems with Daryl Morey handing out these player options, is that these guys do control the cards here. Now, to dive down sort of the free agent list, we know the status with Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey, who, by the way, Daryl Morey spoke incredibly highly about their belief in that trio, and that he just needs to do a better job providing the supporting cast around him. The other players, Kelly Oubre, it's the player option as we discussed, Drummond, the player option as we discussed, and the other thing that I did want to toss in here, about an $8 million player option for Oubre, a $5 million player option for Drummond. There is a world in which you combine those two salaries, and $13 million can get you a pretty solid player as far as just the dollar figure that we're talking. There's obviously going to be draft capital and things to actually make the trade a little bit more appealing than just those guys if you're targeting a specific player. But if Daryl Morey has zero interest in these guys being back, that is an option there. Then there's Quentin Grimes, a restricted free agent, and another guy Daryl Morey spoke really highly of that seems really intent and really convinced that he will be a member of the Sixers next year as well, and I think rightfully so. We will go a little bit more in depth in that in the future as well. Jared McCain, obviously he just needs to rest up, get healthy. He's around for the long haul. Eric Gordon, the player option, don't think we got to worry about that one. Kyle Lowry, an unrestricted free agent, so there is no commitment for either side at this current point, can walk away. Gershon Yabusele, an unrestricted free agent. Daryl Morey's comments on him was that we definitely want to have the conversations with Yabusele. We do hope to retain him. We think we're in an okay spot to retain him, but he's obviously an unrestricted free agent, so anything can happen there. I think that one is going to be pretty dependent on what happens during the NBA draft lottery. The only thing that I'll note as sort of a point of optimism for Yabusele ultimately returning here is I do think we kind of overstated what his market was at the start of the season. I would be pretty shocked if Yabusele ends up pulling in more than $10 million a year. I think that's like really high, and the Sixers could not get to that high of a number. But my point here being is that there's really very few teams with that amount of cap space to throw when you look around the landscape of the NBA to this point. And I don't think Yabusele's like direct dollar figure is probably going to creep up to the level that maybe a lot of us were projecting at the start of the season. He did lose a little bit of gas down the stretch of the season, and obviously was asked to do a lot of things that on an actual winning basketball team he will not have to do during the home stretch of the year. So we'll see on Yabusele. Still a lot of moving parts, but I do think there will be conversations, and that will be something to monitor there. Ricky Council is on a non-guaranteed deal, and boy, they got to get rid of Ricky, man. It's frustrating because I was a Ricky believer for a large portion of time, but for my same message of getting 15 guys that can actually help you win basketball games, Ricky Council is not one of those at this point in his career, and I'm fully ready to pull the plug on, taking our lumps and hoping he continues to improve. Adem Bona, a guy who did emerge, and I do think we'll be pushing for those backup center minutes where we will have that conversation as it pertains to Joel Embiid, how the outlook does change, and obviously Andre Drummond a part of this conversation as well, but I think Bona was truly one of the bigger bright spots on the season. Lonnie Walker has the club option there, which I do think the Sixers will pick up, I would have to imagine. Closed the season really strong, finished with a 30-point performance in the final game of the season as well. He will be back. I'm confident in that. Same with Jared Butler and Justin Edwards, to be honest. Edwards, phenomenal contract. Very impressed. One of the bigger storylines, I would say, of the season is how good he looked as well. So the better days are ahead for this Sixers team is what we can rest on to this point. My last note before I sign up here, I do appreciate that these guys want to come back. There's also got to be a little bit of point of we can't just run it back. That this season was obviously horrible for a lot of reasons, but clicking those same buttons and running those same plays does not improve my optimism for next year. So we'll see how things shake out. Still a lot of offseason content to break down and get into. But let me know what you guys think about those three specific players. Who do you want back? Who do you not want back? And what do you do if all these guys do want back in the way that they do seem to be declaring here? So drop those comments below. As always, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.